Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time you are tuning in. Welcome to Gardening and Homesteading in the Suburbs. I'm Emma from Misfit Gardening, and I'm so glad that you're here with me today. Today, we are talking all about storage crops and the sort of plants that you might want to consider growing in your garden in the upcoming years. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after this. Hello, welcome back, everybody. I am so glad that you're here. Happy Thanksgiving. We just celebrated our first homegrown, home reared Thanksgiving here. We had chicken because that's what we raised. That's what we were allowed to raise in our suburban setting. So we had chicken, we had other associated side dishes and stuff that go with that, but it was something that we'd grown, raised and baked ourselves. Even the wine, I brewed the wine. It was my carrot whiskey wine, brewed back in 2014, so it was a good vintage, but we had that with it. And, I'm really pleased to say that it was a wonderful Thanksgiving with family. And of course, we made it all ourselves from things that we had grown and raised ourselves. So I think it was quite possibly one of the most special Thanksgivings that, certainly I'd ever had. And I think we'd all had really as a family, because we know the effort that went into growing those sweet potatoes and growing up broccoli and harvesting it and the beans and everything else. So that was really good. So today is actually Black Friday, and I'm trying to, do something slightly more productive than battle my way through the stores today. So I want to talk a bit about storage crops, and the reason why I'm talking a bit about this is because even though, for me, the garden is pretty much done. We're on our fall tidy up at the moment, but this is sort of the time of year where I start to plan what I'm going to be growing for next year, because I want to have an idea of what we're going to be growing before those beautiful seed catalogs start showing up, because I know they're coming. And I love growing heirloom veggies, and the Baker Creek seed catalogue has me every single year. There's always something new in there, always something that I want to try growing. So I like to have a plan and kind of take stock of what seeds I have and what I'm going to need. And we recently went to a friend's house, and they did a beautiful dinner of braised steak and mash. But in the mash, they had swede, or rutabaga, to those of you in the US, and it was really good, and my husband really liked it, and now he wants to take a look at growing rutabagas and swedes next year. Rutabaga and swedes are actually a really good storage crop, and actually lots of other root vegetables are too. So turnips are pretty good, parsnips, beets and carrots, and even celeriac or celery root. They're all very good crops to grow because they store really well over winter with minimal effort from, you, the homesteader, which is great, because I don't know about you guys, but I spend most of September and August canning. That's pretty much all that my husband did as well, was canning. We were canning tomatoes left, right and center. We were making chutney and pickles and jam, and it didn't stop. So actually having crops that we can grow that don't need that kind of processing, oh my goodness, it makes all the difference, especially when you are busy and having to juggle, work and, the chores at home and everything else. So the great thing about beets, carrots, parsnips, turnips, swede, rutabagas, and celery root or celeriac is that you can, if you live in a mild area like in the UK and you don't have very harsh winters, you can actually keep those in the ground, cover them with lots of straw or mulch, and just lift them out of the ground as you need them, which is fantastic, right? You don't have to worry about where they're going to go and all that good stuff. But if you live somewhere where they have, a lot harsher winters, consider storing these in a root cellar. If you don't have a root cellar but you've got a newer house with a window well, you can actually turn a window well into a root cellar. Seriously, Google it. There's another blogger here in Utah, and I believe the website is Our Stoney Acres, and he's turned his window wells into a root cellar. It's pretty awesome. I don't have window wells to be able to do that, but we could actually create a small root cellar by digging a big hole in the garden and sinking in a barrel or a drum that we can, take a lid on and off, packing the outside of that with some sort of insulation, so straw is pretty typical, and then you can put your root crops and stuff in there. That's why it was called a root cellar, because it's where you would store your root veggies. So that keeps it cool but stops it from freezing in there, so that's an ideal place to be storing them. You can also try a clamp, which is something similar, but that's usually above the ground, and it's well insulated. Sometimes you put layers of damp sand in there to help keep the moisture levels right, to help stop things drying out and getting wrinkly. So there's lots of different methods on how to store root crops, and a quick Google search should be able to help me find something that works for you and the space that you have. Some other good storage crops have been garlic and onions, and the fantastic thing about garlic and onions, if your garden soil hasn't frozen yet, you can get your garlic cloves planted, and if you do the onion sets, which are the little like itty bitty baby onions, and you can get those in the ground now and cover them with a layer of mulch, and summer next year those bad boys are going to be ready for you. So you can get those planted, and they store really well, somewhere cool and dry, particularly if the skins, are allowed to dry out properly next year. So that makes a good storage crop. And it's kind of fun to braid the garlic and the onions together. We've got lots and lots of garlic. We've sown lots of garlic ready for next year from the garlic that I grew last year, so we don't need to worry about buying that, which is fabulous. Potatoes are probably the quintessential storage crop when people think about crops for storage, and it's main crop potatoes that are typically the ones that are stored. And the key thing for me is when growing potatoes is grow a variety that you like and make sure that you cure the skins before you try and store them, because that'll help reduce the number of ones that go bad that happen. And again, you want to keep them somewhere cool and dry and away from the sun. There's so many varieties of potatoes that are out there, and you need to really do a little bit of research in what's going to grow well for you. For us, the Viking potato grew really well, and that was definitely the best cropping variety that I grew. and I grew from certified organic seed potato. I didn't try growing from, spuds that we'd bought from the grocery store that had sprouted. I didn't do that because I like to try different varieties of things, and I'm not always sure what variety of potatoes growing and whether it's actually going to grow well for me, because a lot of potatoes come from certain parts of the country and they're growing climates are very different from what I'm growing with. So, it's one of those things, like, you might have a bit of trial and error. I know if you're in the UK, blight is a big problem for potatoes and also your tomatoes. So you need to be getting varieties that are going to be resistant to certain diseases that may be prevalent in your area. So do a bit of research and find out what potatoes are likely to grow in your area, and ask other gardeners, see what they're growing. They might have a variety that grows really well, and take a look at places like Seed Saver Exchange, and other local seed banks and stuff. There might be some potatoes that are going to grow well for you that you can trade for some other seeds, or you can barter with. And this is sort of the time of year where people are starting to have those or get those planned, like seed swaps and things like that. So definitely check those out for your local area to be able to get varieties that are going to grow well for you. Beans is probably my absolute favorite plant. I love runner beans. I love green beans. My family not so much, but I absolutely adore them. And to me, runner beans is like that surefire way for me to, go back in time and be with Big Grandad and Granny in the garden with my sister Jenny, and we're looking for the biggest bean, or we're helping harvest the green beans to have with dinner that night. I love beans so much, and we grew a few different varieties of beans this year. I tried some heirloom open pollinated varieties from Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds, and I grew my Borlotti beans from the seed that I'd saved from the previous year, and the Borlotti beans did even better this year. I had maybe 7 or 8 beans per pod, which is a lot more than what they were last year. So I saved some of those long beans, the longer ones, and save those seeds to be able to grow next year, because that's ultimately what I and my family really enjoy, is dried beans. So we grew lots of different varieties, and we must have harvested maybe 15 gallons. So that's 3 5-gallon buckets full of the dried pods that we're working through. We've already got probably a gallon worth of dried beans currently. I've got another 5-gallon bucket of shelling to do. But the great thing about beans is that once they're dry, they really don't need any other preservation other than just keeping them somewhere that's cool and dry, because you don't want moisture getting in those. So they're a really easy crop to be able to grow, whether you're growing them on bamboo canes or on trellis. I much prefer pole beans to grow for my drying beans, and that's what a lot of pole bean varieties are drying beans. But it doesn't mean that you can't grow bush bean varieties and let those stay on the vine and dry and then use those. Like I said, I grow lots of different varieties because I like different colours, shapes and textures in the food that I eat, and it's always really interesting to me. There's a variety, Old Mother Stallard beans, that I grew this year, and they're like these maroon and white little beans, and they've got this kind of swirly pattern on them. And every time I open up a pod and look at them, it looks like I'm looking at a mini little galaxy, which I think's kind of cool. So I really like those, and I love the varieties that are now available. So beans is definitely my number one storage crop. Another good crop to store are actually sweet potatoes, or yams, and they grow really well. They don't really attract a lot of pests, certainly not in my garden, and they don't take a lot of input, from me as a gardener either. So I just pop the slips into the bed, and, I don't really do anything else. I mean, the vines kind of grow over everything. They mulch stuff. And then, sort of after the first frost or so, I will go ahead and lift them up, and I let them dry a little bit. So I've got them in some wicker baskets currently, and they're sort of drying somewhere kind of warm and airy, to help kind of cure those skins a little bit, and that'll help them store a little bit longer. But sweet potatoes have been a revelation for me to be able to grow. I know that there's a few gardeners in the UK who have tried growing them and not had a lot of luck. They do like to be warm, so if you've got them, and you're in the UK and you want to try and grow them, for sure they need a bit of space. Because the vines will put down extra roots and things. So give them plenty of space. You want to give them plenty of mulch because they want to keep those roots warm. And I would just go ahead and grow them in the greenhouse. That's probably going to be the best way to get a decent crop of them. But sweet potatoes actually store really well. And the beautiful thing about those is that they've got complex carbohydrates in them, so they'll help you kind of feel fuller for longer. And speaking of feeling fuller for longer, Jerusalem artichokes, also known as sunchokes, which are a member of the sunflower family. Oh my goodness, I grew these in one of my raised beds, and I don't have huge raised beds anyway. They're about 2 feet by 5 feet in size, to kind of keep things relatively small and easy to manage. But I planted a couple of the artichokes, the tubers that I picked up just from the grocery store down the street. I planted those, and out of two square feet, I've got one of those large 20-gallon trucks, like the plastic rubber like bucket things. They're kind of flexible, super handy. But 3/4 full this truck is, and it is just of these Jerusalem artichokes. And I love Jerusalem artichokes. They're great. Again, they're full of complex carbohydrates and stuff, so they're one of those foods that are recommended if you are trying to go low carb and all that good stuff. And the only problem with Jerusalem artichokes is, man, you are in for a windy night ahead. Where I come from, we called them fartichokes because there was just no way that, you were not going to be, farting up a storm after you had those. And we're trying to think of creative ways to eat them because we have so many. I still haven't harvested the rest of them out of the garden bed. I've just mulched that garden bed and cut the tall stalks down, which were like 10 feet tall, by the way. They were huge. And and I'm just leaving them there, and I'm going to try and harvest them when I can. But for sure, that bed is probably only going to grow Jerusalem artichokes from now until, we pull out all the soil and, try and get every last tuber out of there. Jerusalem artichokes are great because they are such prolific producers. However, they can be very invasive because they spread, they put the tubers down very readily, and if you don't get them all out, they will just keep coming back year after year. So they're a great perennial to be able to grow, but for sure you need to contain them into a boxed raised bed or a container or something, so you don't run the risk of them taking over your entire garden. But Jerusalem artichokes, have been a wonderful crop to grow, and they've not really taken a lot of processing to use in the kitchen. And like I said, I've just kept the rest of them out there and heavily mulched, so when I want some more, I'll be able to go out there and harvest some. But I mean, I've got this entire trug in the house that I still need to get through. But one of my friends suggested fermenting them helps to remove the gas problem, we'll say. But I've got some fermenting lids for mason jars and a fermenting crock, so we'll give that a go and see how that turns out. We're almost at the end of the storage crops. Let's talk next about winter squash. Now we're talking pumpkins and other winter squashes. And if you get the right variety, some of them can store for up to 6 months. Yes, you heard that right, up to 6 months. Now, we've grown so many different varieties of winter squashes and pumpkins over the year, but some of the best keepers have been like the Turban squash varieties. Those store really well. And we've just got a new one, Chioggia di Marina. I've probably not pronounced that right. I will put the varieties in the show notes so people can find them. But these are like these giant kind of flattened green, warty winter squashes, but my goodness, they are delicious and they keep really, really well. But there's lots of different varieties. There's lots of ones that store very well. You just need to make sure that the skins are cured by the sun. Ideally cured by the sun. If not, you can put them somewhere, cool and dry, and they should keep well. But pumpkins and winter squashes are a great source of calories during winter. And the lovely thing about squashes and pumpkins is you can use them in sweet and savoury dishes. I love growing winter squashes. They're another favourite vegetable for me to grow along with beans. Now, storage crops wouldn't be complete without talking briefly about corn. Corn for drying is obviously much better for storing. So you've got like popping corn, flint corn, which you can grind up to make flour and meal and those kind of things. There's lots of different varieties of corn. I'm not an expert on growing corn. I've only grown it for a couple of years. And, I'm finding varieties that I like. I like the glass gem corn because it's pretty and you can eat it fresh or cooked, or you can dry it and use it as popcorn. So I like things that you can eat in a variety of ways. But next year I'm going to try growing popcorn. So we'll see how that goes. But I know lots of people who grow corn for, making into flour and various other things. And finally, for me, is apples being a storage crop. Because if you get the right variety of apple, they can store very well, providing you fresh fruits throughout the year. And amazingly, there are more than like the 305 varieties of apples that you may get in the grocery store here. I got to tell you guys, in England, there was so many more varieties of apples that were in the grocery store than what I ever saw here in the US. And there's definitely varieties that I really miss from my homeland. But the wonderful thing is that there are plenty of suppliers and orchards, that are here in the US. And, there's so many varieties that you can try and grow. And because we're in the dormant season for apple trees, if your ground is still workable, buy some bare root trees and get them in the ground, give them some love, and they will produce for many, many years to come. We've got, I want to say, 5 different varieties of apple tree. I think I'm going to have to check, because some of our apple trees are multi-grafted, so we've got lots of different varieties that are growing. And it's always really exciting seeing the apple blossom and seeing the bees going at those. But there's many different varieties of apples that can store in, a cool, dark place. Without refrigeration, they will store very well. And that was originally how apples were stored. I mean, you can also turn them into hard cider as well, which is probably my favorite way to have apples. But the cooking apples have got higher tannin levels, and those seem to be the ones that store much better. So you can turn those into pies, cakes, sauce, whatever else that you like to turn your apples into. But there's so many different varieties that are available, and if you live somewhere that has pick your own orchards and stuff when it comes to fall, for sure I would recommend going out and heading to those places so you can try new varieties. I know in the UK there's lots of groups that can help you forage for different apples. And there's maps that will show you where those things are in your local area, so you can try different varieties. And of course, you could always try growing some of those from seed, or if you're very skilled and you have the permission of the landowner, maybe taking some cuttings from those and have a go at grafting those yourself. So that's it. It's a bit of a longer episode, but just to wrap up, we've got storage crops of our root vegetables, so our parsnips, beets, carrots, turnips, rudabakers, swede, and celery root, celeriac. We've got our drying beans, we've got potatoes, we've got garlic and onions. We've got apples, we've got Jerusalem artichokes or sunchokes, and sweet potatoes, and of course pumpkins, winter squash, and corn. So what's your favorite storage crop? I would love to know. If you want to join the tribe, head over to Facebook and you can find our group on there, and you can join other suburban homesteaders that are trying to live a little bit more sustainably, or raise their own food and grow their own food right in their very own backyards. Until next time, I'm Emma from Misfit Gardening, and I hope that your garden grows beautifully. Until then, take care and happy Thanksgiving. This podcast uses the song Exhilarate by Kevin MacLeod from Incompetech.com. Licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0 license. The song is used for both the beginning and ending credits.